Here's the thing about money that nobody really wants to admit. Most of us are making the exact same financial mistake every single day, and we don't even know it. We think we're being responsible. We think we're making smart choices. But there's this invisible line in our spending that once you see it, completely changes how you think about every dollar that leaves your bank account. Let me paint you a picture. It's Tuesday night. You're tired. You've had a long day at work, and you're scrolling through your phone trying to figure out what to eat for dinner. You could cook something, there's food in the fridge, but honestly, you just don't have the energy. So you open DoorDash or Uber Eats, and 20 minutes later, you've spent $38 on a meal that would have cost you maybe $7 to make it home. And here's the uncomfortable part. You don't even feel bad about it. In fact, you barely think about it at all, because it's just $38, right? It's not like you bought a new car or took out a second mortgage, it's just dinner. But then Saturday rolls around, and you're thinking about buying a really nice chef's knife. You've been wanting one for months. It's $150. And suddenly, you're paralyzed. You're reading reviews for 2 hours. You're comparing prices across 5 different websites. You're asking yourself if you really need it. You're wondering if you should wait for a sale. And eventually, you probably don't buy it at all, because $150 feels like too much money to spend on a knife, even though you'd use it literally every single day for the next 10 years. Do you see the problem here? We just spent $38 without thinking twice, but we can't pull the trigger on something that costs $150 that would actually improve our lives significantly. This is the financial contradiction that most of us are living with every single day, and it's costing us way more than we realize. My name is John, and I spend way too much time thinking about the psychology of spending decisions. If you're someone who checks their bank account and genuinely has no idea where all your money went, or if you feel guilty about spending on things that matter but somehow have no problem dropping money on things you forget about by next week, hit subscribe and give this video a thumbs up. Because today, we're talking about what I call the $3,000 rule, and I promise you, once you understand this concept, you will never think about your money the same way again. Now look, I know what you're thinking. Another financial rule, another thing to remember, another way to feel bad about how I'm spending my money. But stay with me here, because this isn't like the other rules you've heard. This isn't about cutting out your morning coffee or bringing lunch from home every day or any of that standard personal finance advice that makes you feel like you can't enjoy anything. This is about something much deeper and much more interesting. This is about the difference between throwaway money and investment money, and why most of us have completely backwards ideas about which is which. Here's what most people don't realize. There's a magic price point somewhere in your brain, and for most people, it's right around $3,000, give or take, where spending suddenly feels real. Below that line, money's kind of abstract. It's just numbers moving around. But above that line, that's when we start treating purchases like they actually matter. That's when we do research. That's when we think about long-term value. That's when we actually care about whether we're making a good decision. And here's where it gets interesting. That threshold is completely arbitrary and totally backwards for most people. Let me show you what I mean with some actual numbers, because this is wild when you break it down. The average American spends about $360 per month on food delivery and takeout. That's according to a 2023 study from Toast, the restaurant software company. $360 per month. That's $4,320 per year on food that we could make at home for probably a quarter of the cost. But because each individual transaction is below our psychological threshold, it's $20 here, $40 there, we don't treat it like real money. Our brains don't engage the same evaluation process that kicks in when we're thinking about buying something expensive. Meanwhile, that same study found that people spend an average of 2 weeks researching purchases over $500. 2 weeks, 14 days of comparing options, reading reviews, asking friends, sleeping on it, for something that costs less than half of what we're spending every single month on DoorDash without even thinking about it. The math here is actually insane when you look at it objectively. Let's say you're considering buying a really high-quality office chair. A proper ergonomic chair that's actually going to support your back costs somewhere between $500 and $1,000. And if you're like most people, that feels expensive. That feels like a lot of money to spend on a chair. So you hesitate. Maybe you buy a cheaper one for $200 instead. Or maybe you just keep using whatever terrible chair you already have that's destroying your posture. But here's the thing. If you work from home, or even if you just use that chair for a few hours every evening, you're probably sitting in it for at least 20 hours a week. That's over 1,000 hours per year. If you buy a quality chair for $800 and use it for 10 years, which is totally reasonable for a good chair, that's less than 8 cents per hour of use. 8 cents per hour for something that directly impacts your health, your productivity, your comfort, and your long-term physical well-being. Compare that to those food delivery orders. $38 for one meal that takes you 20 minutes to eat. That's $114 per hour if we're measuring value the same way. And the meal is gone. It didn't improve your life in any lasting way. It didn't make you healthier. It didn't give you a new skill. It just temporarily solved the problem of, I'm hungry and I don't want to cook. Now, you might be thinking, okay, John, but I need to eat every day. I don't need a new chair. And look, I get it, but that's actually proving my point. We're really good at justifying the small, repeated expenses. We tell ourselves they're necessities, or that we deserve them, or that they're too small to worry about. But we're terrible at recognizing actual investments in our lives, because they require us to spend above our psychological threshold, and that activates all of our financial anxiety. Here's what's actually happening in your brain when you make spending decisions, and this is backed by some pretty fascinating research. There's a study from Carnegie Mellon that looked at brain activity during purchasing decisions using fMRI scans. When people saw products they wanted, the pleasure center of their brain lit up, the nucleus accumbens, same area that responds to things like food and sex. But when they saw the price, a different area activated, the insula, which is associated with pain and negative emotions. Literally, spending money triggers the same neural pathways as physical pain. But here's the crucial part. The intensity of that pain response is largely based on how our brain categorizes the expense. Small, frequent purchases don't trigger as much pain because we're used to them. They're normalized. Our brain has learned that spending $20 or $30 or $50 is just part of daily life, so the pain signal is relatively weak. But large, infrequent purchases, those slam the pain button hard, even if they're objectively better uses of our money. This is why subscriptions are such a brilliant business model, by the way. $15 a month doesn't hurt. It barely registers. But if Netflix asked you to pay $180 once per year, which is the exact same amount of money, it would feel much more expensive, and you'd be way more likely to question whether you're actually getting value from it. The $3,000 rule is about recognizing this psychological trap and deliberately overriding it. It's about understanding that your brain's financial pain response is not actually a reliable guide for making good financial decisions. In fact, it's often exactly backwards. Let me give you another example that really drives this home. I have a friend, we'll call him Marcus, who was complaining to me about money being tight. He felt like he was living paycheck to paycheck, never getting ahead, always stressed about finances. So I asked him to pull up his credit card statement, and we went through it together. In the past 3 months, he had spent almost $700 on mobile game purchases, not games themselves, but in-app purchases, little $5 transactions here and there for extra lives or power-ups or whatever. $700 in 90 days. Meanwhile, his laptop was 5 years old and barely functioning. It took 10 minutes to start up. Programs crashed constantly. He was losing hours of productivity every week fighting with this machine. I suggested he buy a new one, and he looked at me like I was crazy. I can't afford that right now. A decent laptop would have cost him about $1,000. Do you see the absurdity here? He had already spent $700 in 3 months on something that gave him zero lasting value, and he was on track to spend another $700 in the next 3 months, and probably for years to come. But spending $1,000 one time on something that would actually improve his life every single day felt impossible. Now look, I'm not trying to shame anyone for how they spend their money. We all have things we waste money on. That's not the point. The point is that we have a broken mental model for evaluating expenses, and it's costing us enormous amounts of money and quality of life. The $3,000 rule says this: any purchase below your threshold, whether that's $3,000 or $2,000 or $5,000, whatever number makes you start feeling real financial anxiety, needs to be scrutinized just as carefully as purchases above it. And any purchase above your threshold that would genuinely improve your daily life or save you money in the long run needs to be evaluated based on its actual value, not just on whether the price tag scares you. This is where it gets really practical, because I'm not just talking about theory. I'm talking about a completely different way to think about your spending that will actually change what's in your bank account 6 months from now. Let's break down how to actually apply this. First, you need to figure out what your personal threshold is. For most people, it's somewhere between $2,000 and $5,000. It's the point where you transition from this is just a purchase to this is a serious financial decision. You probably already know what this number is for you. It's the amount that you'd want to talk to your partner about it, or that you'd sleep on the decision for a few days, or that you'd feel genuinely nervous clicking the buy button. Once you know your threshold, you need to start treating everything below it with the same scrutiny you'd give purchases above it. This doesn't mean you can't spend money on small things. It means you need to actually think about whether those small things are worth it. Here's a technique that works really well. Annualize your small recurring expenses. That $30 subscription you barely use, that's $360 per year. That daily coffee shop visit at $6, that's over $2,000 per year. When you look at these expenses on an annual basis, they suddenly cross your threshold, and your brain starts treating them like real money. Now, you might be thinking, but John, if I add up every small expense and annualize it, I'll feel guilty about everything and never enjoy